There is a specific kind of person who grew up learning to read every room before they walked into it, who learned very early to negotiate between people who wanted opposite things, who became so skilled at holding the middle ground that somewhere along the way they forgot they were allowed to take a side, who could speak the language of everyone around them while never quite feeling like they belonged to any one group. They might be the literal middle child born between siblings, structurally positioned in the gap, or they might simply feel like one because something in their history installed the same psychological software. And what that software produces in adulthood is one of the most under-examined personality profiles in psychology. Picture the family photo album. The firstborn has an entire volume. Every milestone documented: first steps, first words, first day of school, the expression on every face in the room. The youngest has their own volume too, the baby, the last chance for all of it, treated with a tenderness shaped by the awareness that these moments won't come again. The middle child is in the photos, but often in the background, slightly off-center because that's where the space was, holding someone else's hand, making a face while everyone looks at the baby. Present, but not quite the subject. That is not a small thing to absorb growing up, and it shapes a great deal. Psychologists who study birth order have found that middle children develop a specific constellation of traits that emerge not from trauma, but from structural reality. The firstborn arrives when parental attention is at its most concentrated. Every milestone is new, every development is documented, every need is the only need in the house. The youngest arrives into a family that has already built its rhythms and learned to love, and tends to hold the youngest as its final chapter. The middle child arrives in a house that is already occupied. The attention isn't absent, it's divided, and the middle child learns, quietly and early, to work with what's available. Psychologist Harriet Schachter identified a process she called deidentification, the way siblings carve out distinct identity spaces to differentiate themselves from each other. The firstborn claims a position. The youngest claims a position. The middle child, denied both, must locate a third option, something original, something that doesn't compete directly with either sibling. This necessity produces, in many cases, a remarkably individual identity. Not assigned, invented, but the process has a cost. The middle child often becomes what family systems researchers call the invisible child, not because no one loves them, but because they are so skilled at managing without being managed that their needs become easier to overlook. They develop a kind of performed ease that functions as social camouflage. They don't cause problems. They don't demand it. They adjust. And the adults in their lives, relieved by the adjustment, often mistake it for wholeness. The ease is frequently not the whole story. Research on birth order and emotional development consistently finds that middle children score higher than their siblings on measures of empathy, perspective-taking, and social negotiation. They are better at reading the emotional landscape of a room, better at mediating between people who want different things, better at finding the position that most people can live with. These are not accidental skills. They were built through repetition in the specific laboratory of their family, where they were, by necessity, the one watching from the middle, translating between camps, figuring out how to make space for themselves without displacing anyone else. If any of this is landing, if you're recognizing yourself in this portrait or recognizing someone you love, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find this conversation. And if exploring the psychology beneath how people were shaped is something you want to keep doing, subscribe. This is exactly what we do here. Here is the paradox that makes middle child psychology genuinely unusual and worth understanding. They are simultaneously the most independent people in the family and the most attuned to others. They learn self-sufficiency early, because the parental bandwidth wasn't always available for every small difficulty. They learned to entertain themselves, solve their own problems, manage their own frustration without adult intervention. The attention wasn't always coming, so they stopped structuring their actions around its arrival. And yet they are also the most socially calibrated. The ones who know intuitively how to enter a room without disrupting its equilibrium, how to make someone feel seen, how to hold two opposing perspectives without requiring either one to be wrong. Independent and cooperative, skeptical and open, self-contained and deeply attuned. It is odd to find yourself there. But middle children do, reliably, and most of them have learned to carry it without remarking on it. What this produces in adulthood is a profile that is consistently underestimated. Because they adapted early to managing without being the priority, middle children often carry what psychologists describe as a low-grade scarcity orientation, not around money or resources, but around attention, belonging, and emotional real estate. They learn that there might not be enough to go around enough space, enough recognition, enough focus, and built their strategies accordingly. They take up less room, they ask for less, they volunteer more, demand less, and sometimes sacrifice their own clarity about what they need in favor of maintaining a harmony that nobody asked them to maintain. In relationships, this shows up as a tendency to overfunction for others while quietly underclaiming for themselves. They are the friends who remember everyone's birthday and forget to mention their own. The partners who notice when something is off and move to address it before it's named. The colleagues who smooth over the conflict that nobody else wanted to touch. They became the negotiators so young that they sometimes forget that negotiation was supposed to be optional. Researcher Robert Zajonk's confluence model of intellectual development found that middle children grow up in a cognitively richer environment than the youngest, surrounded by older siblings who expand their vocabulary, their frame of reference, their sense of what adults talk about while receiving less direct parental investment than the firstborn. They absorb more than they're credited for. They are often more capable than people expect, precisely because the expectation was never structured around them in the first place. There is something specific that gets lost in this position, and it deserves to be named. You lose the uncomplicated certainty of your place. The firstborn knows they were first. The youngest knows they were cherished as the last. The middle child often spends years trying to locate the thing that makes them distinctly, unambiguously theirs, and finding, again and again, that the in-between position doesn't come with a fixed identity the way the edges do. It comes with fluency, adaptability, the ability to move between worlds, but not always with a clear sense of where you're from. What is gained, though, is harder to overstate. The middle position produces people who can hold contradictions without needing to resolve them, who can understand everyone in a conflict without being captured by either side, who learned, before most people even thought to ask the question, how to adapt to an environment without losing themselves inside it. That last skill, adapting without disappearing, is one that most people spend decades trying to develop. Middle children often arrive at adulthood already knowing how. The middle position was never the lesser position. It was the hardest position. And the one that built, quietly and without ceremony, something the other positions rarely produce. The ability to understand everyone in the room without needing to be the one everyone is watching. That is not invisibility. That is a very particular kind of power, and it belongs entirely to the people who built it from the inside out. Have you always felt like the one holding the middle? Whether or not you were the middle child, leave it in the comments. You might find the answer tells you more about yourself than you expected. Thank you for watching.